Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to my channel. So today we have another uh, candidate with us who, Alhamdulillah, passed his interview and written test as well, and now he's mashallah lecturer. So he is Bilal Noor. He's from Islamabad, and rest of introduction he is going to give about himself. I would only say
It's 7
something
o'clock.
about Bilal that he got 84 marks, and the topper of PPSC he also got 84 marks because Bilal speaks really well, and he is also having a good command on literature, linguistics, English language. Plus, second thing that I like about Bilal is that we had our PPSC group. So उस group के बहुत सारे students से but Mehran and Bilal, they were both very accommodating and they were very cooperating with the people. They were always helping them. They were always like telling them whatever they asked. So इनका जो cooperation है that basically became a base. दुआएं लगी इन्हें. So let's have a talk with Bilal. So Assalamu alaikum Bilal, how are you?
Walaikum salam, sir. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me over. It's a real honor to be here speaking with you.
Okay, honor is all mine. So we would, or people would like to know about you, first of all.
Yeah, of course, of course. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I'd like to apologize about the background. I just threw it on randomly. So, it's going to be here throughout the meeting. So, I hope that's okay.
That's fine.
Anyways, all right. So, I would like to start by introducing myself for a minute, if I can. Sir Jahanzeb said that I'm from Islamabad. That's kind of true. I've worked in Islamabad for about a year now, but I'm actually from Miawali, specifically Chashma. I don't know, I'm sure some of your viewers are from this area, definitely. So, I'll start with how I actually started the PPSC interview. Actually, I started by introducing myself and with my graduation specifically. So I graduated last year from University of Srikoda Subcampus Miawali, which is now an independent university of its own, known as University of Miawali. Okay, so that was my graduation, and other than that, my journey and my attachment with literature that began a long time ago. That began around 6-7 years ago during my FSC years, actually. So, um, so if the area in where I live here in Chashma, this is the kind of place in which technical expertise were really regarded to have great value at that time. So when I did my matric, Alhamdulillah, with 92%, everyone expected me to be an engineer, right? So I opted for pre-engineering, but I, for better or for worse, I had lost. You could say I'd lost my faith in the sciences. So I became a backbencher in the sense, but in the sense that on those last seats, I was always reading some kind of novels or something like that. Those 3 years, I spent 3 years in FSC. I spent an extra year as well, and still I got 59% marks. And I mentioned this in my interview that the only inconsistency you will see in my academic record is in my FSC result. But I have no regrets. Never did. The reason I dropped down so low is because I was focusing at that time on a completely different area. Okay, and that means literature. So my journey with literature began with Dickens. Okay, primarily I started with the Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Then I moved on to Oscar Wilde, and uh, all of my 3 years in FSC I actually spent in reading books. I was obsessed. I was obsessed to a point that, and it wasn't like hard work for me either. Okay, I mean, people consider के बहुत मेहनत की होगी आपने या something like that. I never thought of it like that, right? Because मेहनत में effort लगती है, and for me it wasn't an effort; it was my escape, right? For example, when these days when we want an escape, we watch a movie or something like that. I used to read books, and I spent like many hours, many happy hours actually in the middle of those books, and I read so much, and I was very happy at that time. But again, My percentage in FSC was so low. Everyone knew that I was not going to be an engineer, and that was a real shock and disappointment to many people, because they thought of me as a smart kid. And I had self-esteem issues in those days as well. Okay, so the reason that I went so far back to my FSC years is because that was the time when actually my preparation started. I mean, that was when my real preparation started. Unknowingly, I was preparing for this test. Okay, this lecture test. So yeah, so that's when it all began. And in those years, I read a lot of authors. Primarily, my main area of interest was the novel, especially the 20th century novel. I wasn't really impressed all that much by the Victorian, so I didn't read Jane Austen um, or Mr. Thorndike or even Stevenson or these kind of authors. I really like Dickens and some other names from the 19th century. You could say I was really impressed with Dostoevsky. On the Russian side, I'd say Crime and Punishment is one of my all-time favorite novels, which I read when I was in first year of pre-engineering. So other than that, I read a lot. I read Oscar Wilde. I read James Joyce, especially had a great effect on me. Um, I learned so much about the possibilities of language and what you could convey through words, through the works of James Joyce. And the group that he had, the group of writers that was present in the 1920s in Paris at that time, which included Joyce, and Joyce was the master at that time. But and under him were people like Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald and even Virginia Woolf. Now, Virginia Woolf um, also contributed a lot towards feminism as well as the stream of consciousness and some other avant-garde techniques that really came into fruition in the early 20th century. But even she admitted that in her personal diary, and not to anyone else, she admitted that Joyce was doing. Joyce was actually using this technique much better than even she was. But nonetheless, she was a great writer as well, and she had a great impact on me. I didn't read To the Lighthouse in my sixth semester, as many people do at our university. I read it during one of my physics lectures, probably. So, yeah. So, again, the reason that I'm explaining in depth about those years of mine, because those are my formative years. They're very, as a teenager, they really had an impact on me, and they've had a and they probably will have a lifelong impact on my writing style, my the way I speak, my even my consciousness. I believe that, and I've never regretted those years. After that, I got admission in bachelor's in English at University of Sargodha, but for the sole and for the primary reason that मुझे और कुछ नहीं आता था, right? That was the only thing I knew. So, and the only thing I was good at. So I got admission in this field. Again, I kept reading, um, and I enjoyed reading a lot. That's the point I want to focus on. I didn't, even when I was reading some of my favorite texts in university, I didn't enjoy it that much, because when you're reading for a class or when you're reading to pass some exams, it's not so much fun anymore. I mean, I don't know if the viewers would agree with me on that, but the years when I was reading primarily for fun and for my own enjoyment, not even for learning. I mean, I wasn't consciously trying to learn. I was just so mesmerized by that entire world of words and the power that words have, that I couldn't let myself go from the words of Kafka or Sylvia Plath or even John Paul Sartre and some other 20th century figures. They really had a big impact on me. A lot of things happened. I probably, even in my university years, I didn't read as much as I did in those three previous years. And I graduated last year in 2021, in the fall of 21. And as soon as I graduated, I got a job in the private sector. So my first job was in a call center, in a proper call center. For those of you who don't know how the BPO industry works and how call centers work, so basically, what we used to do in those days is we used to cold call Americans all day long. I mean, we used to talk to like hundreds of people every day, and try to convince them to, because basically I'm a seller. Okay, we and that's my basic skill set is trying to sell someone something. So yeah, so that industry really taught me a lot. We used to work on mortgage. Okay, so that's basically the entire housing market in the United States. So I used to talk to a lot of people about their finances and about their situation, and I learned a lot about the American economy and how primarily the American middle class is living. Okay, so that's why that's another reason why I've developed this sort of American Canadian accent, because I've been talking to Americans all day long for perhaps the past year. Okay, so that was something that really helped me with the interview actually. So yeah, so after that I switched companies as well, and I'm also recently working at a different company, and this is business to business. So when I was in business to customer calls, those were a lot of fun, because even if someone doesn't want to buy anything, what those guys, because they were very random people that we used to call. I mean, they could be very rich, they could be very poor, just very random people, sometimes professors of universities and things like that. I once actually called up a guy, and we started a conversation, and it lasted for about an hour. And he was an old man living in Las Vegas, and he turned out to be a friend of a very well-known author now, Hunter S. Thompson, who wrote a book, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Okay, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. There's also a movie on it by Johnny Depp. It's a very great film. So he was telling me about Hunter S. Thompson stories, and what kind of guy he was. So the point here is that this industry taught me a lot, and actually getting a job as soon as I got out of university, and trying to make ends meet, and trying to make a living for myself, that really helped me out. I didn't go into private schools specifically, and that was very, very intentional, because I knew that and I'm sure everyone will agree with me that private school teachers are very overworked and very underpaid. I mean, that's definitely true. So, about a year ago, when I applied for this job, I think we applied for this position in December of 21. I believe that's when the seats came out. But, because it was mostly my friends who pushed me to apply for this. I didn't really want to, you know. And a few months later, फिर इसका test भी आ गया, and I was like, मुझे तो text आया तब मुझे याद आया कि oh yeah, I applied for this job, okay, because I was starting to make some good money in the private sector at the time, and I was kind of happy with my situation. I was enjoying myself, and I was learning a lot, and I was having so much fun that I thought that you know I don't need anything else, right? But then the test came, and I was like, okay, here's the test, all right. And the thing is, and the thing that I regret the most, even till now, that I didn't really took it seriously, and which I would not advise, of course, everyone else to do. I mean, do take it seriously and do study for it. And if you do study for it for like even a couple of months, then it's pretty easy to pass. I mean, trust me. I didn't really study for it, and on the day of the test, I went in literally without any preparation, and I took the test. And because so the literature part, I did pretty well, I think. Okay, the literature part I covered pretty well, because of the preparation that I had done many years ago during my FSC years, the time that I spent in literature. And by preparation, look, um, I don't know what this trend is in universities these days, sir. I don't know you would if you would agree with me or not on this point or not. But students aate hain, and they memorize the names of a lot of words. Okay, and they say कि हमने बस ठीक है से इसको तैयार कर लिया. Like that's not it. Okay, when I went into the interview, I mentioned to the panel that okay, these are the authors I have read, and I have not read Shakespeare. even though I know the name of every Shakespeare play and I know the themes of lots of them, but I have not read Shakespeare. I can't say that. I have not read Tolstoy. Okay, and so the thing with an interview is that you have to think of it like a conversation. I mean, you can't just make it a monologue when you're speaking and speaking and presenting your own points of view. You have to make it a conversation, and that's what I did. In the interview, when I actually so I was on the test when I actually uh, took the test. I knew because a good portion of the test was from linguistics, from the major theories of linguistics, which I had not touched at all, and so I knew that I'm not going to pass this test. I knew it right away because a good portion of it was from that. But when actually a few months later, when some of my friends called me up and told me that I'd passed the test, and I was like, wow, really? Because I guess the merit was so low that it was my first test in the government sector, so I really didn't know what the criteria was and everything. But again, I passed it. Of course, I wouldn't advise anyone to do what I did and not take it seriously. Do take it seriously, please do, and because it can be the opportunity of a lifetime. And yeah, really study for it. I mean, sir Janzeb ki videos consult kare, which I actually discovered later after the test. I discovered your YouTube channel and I got in touch with you regarding the interview. Because when I passed the test, I took it like a sign from Allah कि शायद मतलब वो मुझे कुछ बताना चाह रहा है कि maybe I should explore this direction as well, right? Because even though I was doing well in the private sector and I was making good money, but still I thought that there's still something missing. I mean, in my undergrad years, I used to teach at some academies, just for fun, and teaching really was something very close to my heart, and I really enjoyed it. So, and for the last year, I wasn't like in touch with teaching at all. Okay, I was basically just a salesman and a hustler. Okay, so and that's what everyone is in the private sector, even if they're like making like six-figure salaries and everything, and they're enjoying life and everything, but everyone's still hustling all the time, and they're on the edge all the time. Okay, and so I thought that maybe perhaps this is Allah is showing me a different direction and maybe I should take it. So I got in touch with Sir Jahan Zaib. He gave me some really useful tips about the interview. Um, Not least of all that I should dress well, because even it may be sensing, because a lot of people, it's ironic that I'm going to be a lecturer because a lot of people really thought of me as a very careless and irresponsible kind of kid. Okay, which I guess to some sense I am, to some degree, but still, अल्लाह जिसको जिस टाइम पे जहाँ पे लेके जाना चाहता है वो उसको पहुंचा देता है, right? So yeah, so the interview came eventually a couple of months later. I was very nervous about it, but on the day of the interview, I was actually the gonna be the last person to be interviewed. So there were 22 candidates in on that day that were supposed to interview, और मेरा number सबसे last पे था. So I kept waiting all day, and eventually I started chatting with all the other candidates. Okay, and by that time, all the nervousness had vanished completely because the wait was so long. That nervousness just completely disappeared. So the by the time my turn came, I went in. मैंने सलाम कहा सबको, and the panel was really polite. They were very pleasant. उन्होंने मुझे बिठाया. They made me comfortable. I did mention, just right as I entered, I mentioned that I'm sorry, I might seem a bit nervous because I've never interviewed for any government position before, right? So that's okay. Sit down, take a breath. It's okay. And they asked me, you've been waiting all day, so how are you feeling now? Are you feeling good? I said, yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling great. But if I knew I was going to be the last person to be interviewed, I would have had some breakfast. Right. So that's where our conversation started. And I made sure that it stayed that way, that it stayed as a conversation. Okay. And not just a question answer session. I intentionally मैंने एक कैजुअल सेंटेंस बोल दिया था शुरू में ताकि थोड़ी सी जो एटमोसफियर है वो लाइट हो जाए, and it worked actually in my favor. So the interview started off pretty regularly. I introduced myself as concisely as I could. Okay, and the journey that had brought me up to that point, and I told them what I was doing these days, and yeah. So after my initial introduction, there were two subject specialists, one male and one female, and then of course Mr. Chairman. To this day, I don't know their names, which is kind of embarrassing. I don't know who the panel was, but khair, anyways. The questioning started. The questioning was pretty simple, actually. It was actually, to be very honest, it was actually a lot. This interview was a lot easier than some other interviews that I've already given in the private sector. I have to say that it was much shorter, and it was much less intimidating. I thought that these are like officers; they would be really intimidating, but they were actually very polite and very nice, and they made me feel very comfortable. So that was very nice of them. And so the questioning started, and I think this is an important point as well कि जब भी आप interview दे रहे हो कहीं पे भी interview दे रहे हो it's important that you should be in the driver's seat, okay, that you should be leading them on, okay. So even at the end of my introduction, before my introduction was finished, at the end of my introduction, I actually told them about the authors in whom I was interested and who had really influenced me throughout the years. So I mentioned James Joyce. जैसे सर ने कहा था कि एक writer prepare करके जाए और उसको mention करें. So I mentioned James Joyce, and I also mentioned to them that I wasn't really aware of the trends in, for example, the Renaissance period or something like that. I mean, and in the 17th century, I guess the only thing I really like about the 17th century is Paradise Lost. और पैराडाइज लॉस्ट की भी मैंने सिर्फ बुक वन पढ़ी है. आई मीन देयर आर 14 बुक्स, और जस्ट बिकॉज देयर आर 14 बुक्स मैं ये नहीं कहूँगा कि मैंने सारी पैराडाइज लॉस्ट पढ़ ली है. जो एक्चुअली रीड किया मैंने, दैट्स द बुक वन. एंड इवन इन दैट देयर सो the poetry is so sublime that you can't even begin to explain. I mean, isn't this like a trend, sir? I've noticed this. Blind poets have actually the best sense of rhythm and music in their poetry. I mean, don't you agree? It was Milton, and before him, it was Homer. Homer is said to be a blind poet, wasn't it? And even James Joyce. James Joyce, in the later parts of his life, slowly went blind, and by the end, he went completely blind. And the poetry in his prose is unimaginably beautiful. It's remarkable. Okay, and that was actually the reason that I was addicted to poetry and prose and novels for so long. And I was actually even very snobbish. I don't know if I should admit this, but I was very snobbish about what good literature and what bad literature is. For example, if someone told me that, I've read The Alchemist and Paulo Coelho and everything, I'm like, great, that's great. But, there are a lot of um, Spanish metaphysical writers who have written much better books. For example, Gabriel Garcia Marquez and his 100 Years of Solitude. That's a great book. That's a book that will give you goosebumps on every line. Okay, on every line. And there's so much life in that book. And it covers so many generations and so many lifetimes that it's like a 5,000 page book condensed into 300 pages. That one single book, the 100 Years of Solitude. It's so good. There's also another book by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It's Love in the Time of Cholera. That's also a great book. So yeah, that it's been kind of a strange journey for me because I didn't really intend to be a lecturer not that long ago, but somehow I ended up here, and it's a place of great honor, really. Or I'm sure इसमें सबसे पहले मेरे parents की दुआएं हैं. My father worked in government service all his life, और उन्होंने सारी जिंदगी एक staff की job की. He was a cook, but he is my pride, and he worked very hard to educate us in the best way that he could. And even though we went to public schools and we didn't study like OA levels, later on when I went into the private sectors, I was actually competing with the guys who did study O and A levels and who did go to very expensive and good universities. And I still did well, alhamdulillah. So I think public sector and government schools get a bad rep now and then, but I think a lot of many great people. I'm not calling myself a great person. I'm just a kid. I admit. I admit that. But a lot of great people have come out of the public sector, definitely. So, and I'm sorry for rambling on. I have this habit of, because as you might imagine, I like to talk a lot, right? So this could go on for a while. If you wanna, say something else, then of course we can continue on after that.
Okay, it was really wonderful listening to you and all the people who are looking at you and who are the candidates of PPSC. Now they should know why Bilal Noor is on ninth merit. So Bilal Noor secured merit number 9, and it was all because of the way he speaks and the way he has a grip on literature. So he was not intimidated. He was very much relaxed, and he started with informal kind of talk with the people over there. So this is what is required, and the way he has an insight into literature, I am wishing to imagine his future students who would be studying under his umbrella, and they are lucky, in fact. So. But again, since I have already said that you got ninth position, and most of the thing that was that mattered in that was your interview, in which you secured, I guess, 84 marks, which were equivalent to the topper. So we would like to know that how did you improve your English? Like despite studying in public schools, it was a great achievement that you were top notch along with those O level, A level students. So, how did you maintain or develop your fluency? How did you develop your vocabulary? And most of all, how did you develop your accent? So, this is what people would like
Right,
to know.
right. Okay, I can imagine. So, as far as the my basic understanding of English and the accent is concerned, I actually developed it at quite a young age. From sixth class onwards, when I was in sixth grade, cable TV was introduced for the first time. I mean, उससे पहले सिर्फ दो channels होते थे, and after that, suddenly, boom! There's a lot of different channels and there's a lot of different content, and I was at that time only interested in English content and specifically Hollywood movies and um, so I watched a lot of Hollywood movies actually and for like 3-4 years straight, a lot of them. Even to this day, I don't think so कि HBO पे कोई movie लगती होगी जिसका जो मैंने कभी ना देखी हो. Okay, it came to that point, and that's why I think even in those days, even before my FSC, I developed this kind of American Canadian accent because Hollywood is of course based in California, right? So, and California has this specific, you could say, educated general American accent, which actually which was imprinted on my young consciousness. I think the best time to really develop your basic communication, well, I wouldn't say communication because I didn't really have anyone else to talk to at that point. But I used to, of course, because when you're listening to another language, even half consciously, even subconsciously, and if you're doing that for a number of years, and especially if you're doing that at a young age, at a very critical age, then that language is going to be ingrained in your mind by default. Okay, so the things that I learned about the structure of language, I learned instinctively. I mean, grammar तो मुझे तब आई थी जब मैंने actually students को पढ़ाना शुरू की थी रैन एंड मार्टिन से. तब मुझे पता चला था कि technicalities of grammar क्या होती हैं. उससे पहले, I mean, I would translate sentences perfectly. I would, मतलब narration and passive voice, ये सारी conversions जितनी भी होती हैं, I would do them perfectly, but I didn't know how I did it. Okay, I just went by the sound. If it sounded right, then it was right. And to this day, I think that's a good technique to go by. Uh, in case of language, you always go by the ear, by the ear. Okay, because the sound that's what really matters. Okay, so that was where I actually developed this kind of accent. And of course, when later on, recently, when I actually entered this industry, this PPO, and this right now, I'm in the software sales industry. So when I was actually professionally dealing with a lot of people, a lot of Americans every day, then of course that was the time when actually my hesitation in speaking and that disappeared completely. Because if you spend one day and if you spend one day like talking to like 200 Americans, then of course that hesitation is gonna disappear. Try it. I mean, do that for one day, and you'll see.
Okay, wonderful. So that is the point. Since it is a skill, so it will be cherished or it will be improved as soon as you practice it. And as long as you keep on practicing the skill, you will have a better accent, just like Bilal knows. So Bilal, last question from you is that how would you like, or what would you suggest those people who are yearning to become a lecturer? So how should they go? How do you want them to step into your shoe, or how do you want that they should study and they should crack interview and written test?
Right. So, I mean, first of all, of course, you have to go with preparation, and especially those people who just graduated in this fall, and the students who came fresh out of universities. I think they should definitely apply, because when you're fresh out of college or when you're fresh out of university, that knowledge is still very fresh in your mind, and you can actually display it better in an exam or an interview. But even if you've been away from your studies for a number for let's say a few years, I mean, this is just a very systematic approach. I mean, if you want to clear the exams, I'm telling you, it's very easy. Okay, you just have to do a few things. You just have to again memorize all the ages and all the writers and all the famous movements, okay, and who did what at what time. Okay, for example, I mean, you don't have to go into depths of literature like I did. For example, I there was a point when I actually studied literary theory in much depth. There is a course that's freely available on YouTube by Yale University. It's an introduction to literary theory. It's a 26-part lecture series that covers literary theory and how it developed in the 20th century. Okay, and I'm sure that Pakistani universities, they actually don't focus on literary theory this much. Okay, but even I studied that as well. Okay, but again, you don't have to go into the depths. Okay, just there are some main for example, the major theories of linguistics and the major movements in literature. That's all you really have to study to clear the test. And after the test, when it comes to the interview, just keep a few things in mind. Be casual, be comfortable with yourself. Okay, um, before the interview, talk to as many people as possible in English. Even if you're a teacher, that's great. I mean, if you're a private school teacher and you're teaching English, I mean, hats off to you, because you're doing a great job. I could never do it. I mean, I tried. I mean, literally, I was almost hired in a private school, in a very well reputed private school, but I didn't go for it because I thought that I would much rather handle pressure as a seller than I could as a private school teacher. I just couldn't. So if you're a teacher, especially, I think and in a private school, then you've got a great opportunity to actually hone and develop your speaking skills. Okay, you don't need really anything else. And of course, when you actually go into the interview, just remember to be in the driver's seat and try to make it a conversation. Okay, so if I actually go into the interview, I started the conversation with my very first sentence. Okay, that if I knew I was gonna be the last person to be interviewed, I would have had some breakfast. Okay, that was a very casual introduction. That was actually my first, that was the main introduction. Your first line is your introduction, because your first impression is gonna be your final impression. Okay, so it's gonna be a very short, like 10-15 minutes interview in which they're gonna judge you. So I mean, you can't gauge a person just like this, but they have to, so they do it. So, and if especially if you've done something creative, for example, if you've written some papers, for example. I mean, when I was in the interview, most of the other candidates had MPhil degrees, and they all of them had their MPhil thesis with them. Okay, and I was the only one who didn't have an MPhil, and I felt very left out. Or मैं सोच रहा था कि अब क्या होगा, right? So all of them were presenting their degrees, and I don't think anyone, at least from that center, anyone else. I don't know if anyone else who got selected, but I did. And I'm not bragging, but why is that? Because they're not looking at your at what you've done. They're looking at what you're doing right there. At if you've done, for example, a thesis, then you should be able to explain it in 1 minute. If you can explain your thesis in 1 minute with perfect precision and accuracy, okay, and in a way that they really understand what the point of that thesis is, then I'd say then that you're good to go. When the final question that the Mr. Chairman साहब ने जो मेरे से पूछा था, that was okay, what do you do in your free time, right? This is a very standard question जो हर किसी से पूछा जाता है. And so everyone's answer is usually that, you know, I watch movies, yeah, I listen to music. Of course, फिर उस किस्म उसमें वो फिर बात पूछते हैं कि what kind of movies, what kind of music, and things like that. So when they asked me this question, I mentioned somewhat hesitantly. I mentioned that I do write sometimes. Okay, I've written a few poems, for example, some stories. So, Mr. Chairman, foreign से मुझसे पूछते हैं कि okay, so you know, read a piece for us, you know, from one of your poems. So that's what I did. I read out one of my own poems. Okay, and that was I think the final nail in the coffin. They were really impressed by that, even though I'd missed a couple of questions in my interview. So, and they were actually very easy questions. Okay, I told you I didn't really catch up on the technicalities of literature. So even I distinctly remember one question कि मैम ने पूछा था कि Keats की negative capability, and I'm sure all of you who are watching, you will know what this is Keats' negative capability. लेकिन मैंने इस पे sorry कह दिया because I thought, you know, I couldn't explain it that well. Okay, and the other questions were pretty easy too, but I tried to answer the questions with an example. For example, sir ने एक suspension of disbelief के बारे में पूछा, which I तो इसके ऊपर as soon as he said suspension of disbelief, I actually started quoting a poem of Coleridge, Kubla Khan, very famous poem. I just started right away. I started quoting parts of it. So from there, like that music loud and long, I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair. And from that poem, I told him what he actually meant by suspension of disbelief, and even other questions like what is meta narrative. I explained that one with an example from the American writer Kurt Vonnegut's book Slaughterhouse-Five, in which the author himself appears as a character. I explained through that example. I explained to him what meta narrative actually means and how it was used primarily in the later part of the 20th century. Anyways, the point is, sir, since we're closing up pretty much here, and it's been a long session now, the point is everyone has different weaknesses and different strengths. For me, the weakness was that a lot of people think of me as a kid, okay, so they don't take me seriously, okay. So we have to make them take you seriously, okay. You have to आपने उन्हें मजबूर करना होता है कि आपको seriously लें, okay. So everyone who is gonna be who is gonna go to the interview, either you're gonna be too old, or you're gonna be too young, or too fat, or too thin, or there's gonna be something about you that you're gonna be nervous about, okay, that people have been holding against you for a long time कि ये तो irresponsible सा बच्चा है, ये कहाँ से होगा, you know. So you can't let the world hold you down, okay. You have to fly. So focus on your strengths, okay, and cash your strengths. My strength was which I developed over the last year, the art of convincing people, okay. Because even आप यकीन माने, you can play with a person's psychology. Even trust me, even when there is a transaction of money involved, when the other person is supposed to actually, when you're selling something, right, when the other person is supposed to actually pay you something, जब उसके जेब से पैसे जाने हैं, even then you can convince him using their established mindsets. Because the trick is, आपने देखना होता है कि what kind of mindset does this person have, which you can pretty much guess. Okay, तो आप ये सोच के जाएं कि ये बंदा किस किस्म के क्वेश्चन कर सकता है और ये किस किस्म के आंसर एक्सपेक्ट कर सकता है. ठीक है, that's the game, that's the secret. And it's not as difficult as it sounds. Okay, it's very easy. You just have to be comfortable, you just have to cache your strengths. Okay, develop the skills that you already have. You will definitely have a few skills. If you have a thesis, for example, you should know everything about it, and you should be able to explain it in a couple of minutes what it's all about and how it's different from everything else. Okay, you have to make yourself stand out. Make yourself stand out. I think that's the last thing I would like to say. Somehow, if you can make yourself stand out, then everything's gonna be easy for you.
Okay, wonderful. When Bilal is speaking, it like feels like that he should keep on talking and we should keep on listening. So he's got the skill, yes, he has got the convincing power and very cute smile. And he's right about interview. Yes, you have to play with psychology of the people, especially the psychology of your interviewer. So you should know from where he may ask questions and what kind of answers he's expecting from you. So we wish you all the best, Bilal Noor, for your placement. We wish that you may be placed where you wish to, somewhere close to your place, or somewhere where things are good for you, where you have better opportunity to express yourselves, where you can train people more, where you can build your own confidence and you can instill the same confidence in your students, and may they follow your path. So it was really very nice talking to you, listening to you, and I hope people will get benefit from your expertise.
Thank you so much, sir. Really appreciate you having me over. It was real pleasure. Hope to do this again someday soon, inshallah.
Inshallah.